Hello, and welcome to this Roots Tech video, exploring the census records of England and Wales. I'm Jana Greenouch, and exploring census records is one of my favorite things to do. I'm an accredited genealogist specializing in England research, and as one who uses census records regularly to tie families together, I'm really excited to share this session with you. Censuses, they tell stories of families spanning many decades from the 19th to 20th centuries. Sometimes we even get glimpses of people who lived earlier than that. So let's spend a few minutes first covering the basics of how to access and read these wonderful records. And then I'm going to dive into some of the lesser known tricks for getting the most out of your census research. England and Wales began to keep censuses as early as 1801, but it's not until 1841 that censuses include the names of every person in a household. So that's where it gets really good. Now, there's a 100-year rule that says we can't see censuses until 100 years has passed, and so that means the newest census is just brand new and becoming available this year is the 1921 census. And so we've got access to 1841 through 1921. That's really awesome. Now I should mention that that's going to be it for a while because 1931 unfortunately was destroyed. That census no longer exists. And 1941 was never even taken because of World War. So let's take a look at what these records contain and what they look like. Here is an 1841 census, and I've zoomed in. I've picked a couple of families and pulled them out of the census so that you can actually read this page. So this census is a little different than all the others. It includes a place and the names of all of the people, but we don't know exactly how they're related. We can make some assumptions, but we got to be careful with that because we're really not sure. We get the age of every person and their gender, but you'll notice if you look carefully at the 1841 census that the ages are rounded to the nearest 5. In fact, they're rounded down actually to the nearest 5. And for children under 15 years old, you get an exact age. So just something to be aware of. It's a little bit different. This is the only census that they did that on. We get a little bit of information about a person's occupation or their profession, and then we get a column where we learn whether or not they were born within the same county that they're currently residing in. It's just a simple yes or no. It's not much, but it's something, so we're grateful. Later censuses kept more information, so 1851 through 1901, they're all very similar. They look something like this, and again, I've zoomed in. I've given you a pop out here so you can try to read some of this writing. This census does include the relationship, so we can tell who the head of the household is and who his wife was and who the sons and daughters or servants or nieces or nephews or farmhands or boarders are. The relationship is made clear. Also, we get their marital status, so that's nice. Ages should be more exact, not rounded, but you never know. Sometimes the ages are off. And now, for a change, we do get the occupation. Sometimes these are a little more detailed in later censuses than in early censuses, but we also get a much more specific birthplace. Thank goodness. Usually you get to learn the exact village or parish and county where each person was born. And then in 1911, we have even more, including some really fun columns that I'm going to mention in a minute. We get an actual address and a signature from the person who filled out the census form. And we have some interesting columns. One of them is shown here with numbers, columns there on the right side, where we learn how long a couple has been married, how many children that the mothers had, and whether those children are still alive at the time of the census. Very helpful information. I also enjoy looking at the numbers at the bottom of the page that give us a little bit of an idea of the kind of home that they lived in. We learn how many rooms were in the house. Now, there are several places that you can access these records, and I'm sharing with you here the websites that include images of the censuses, the census pages, because that's always better than just an index. Now, I personally appreciate the functionality of searching at Ancestry.com. Everybody's got their favorite. That happens to be mine. But an important note for researchers is this. If you don't find what you're looking for in census records on one site, try other sites. The indexes might be different. And like I said, never stop at just the index entry. When you're searching on these websites, dig and drill down to the actual image of the census record. As genealogists, we always want to view that image ourselves to make sure we agree with the indexer's interpretation of the information. And then we can benefit from the many columns of detail that may not have been indexed. Plus, the old handwriting's beautiful, unless it's not, but hopefully your ancestors are all on the nice, clean, less messy pages. And just a tip about that, if you're struggling to make out some of the letters, read more of the page than just the one person you're looking at. Compare the other words, the other letters on the page, and often if you do that, you can make sense of it. You can learn the handwriting style. Now, most of the censuses of England and Wales, they're in great shape. But one day when I was struggling to find one of our Greenouch ancestors in the indexes of the 1851 census, I browsed to the pages of the town that they were from, and I realized very quickly why the index wasn't finding them. This area had suffered some damage to their census pages, which is tragic. They're hardly legible. But this kind of thing is very rare in English censuses, and I want you to know that. In my experience, very few people were missed. As long as they didn't leave the island for some reason, we can almost always find who we're looking for. Sometimes this requires that we dig pretty hard, use variant spellings, try some different search tactics creatively to make the indexes find what we're looking for. And sometimes we have to give up on the indexes altogether and just dig right into those census images themselves to see what the indexer may have mistranscribed or what was hard to make out. You can do this by simply browsing to the county and the town that you expect someone to be in. And this is a little bit harder if you're in a larger city with lots of divisions or what they call enumeration districts. That would give you many more pages to search through, but you can just comb through the pages one by one looking for the person that you expect or hope to find living there. You might also be very interested to know, and I don't know a lot of people that use these, but they're there and they can be helpful, that at the beginning of each district, you can find a page of notes about the directions the enumerator followed up and down streets and through neighborhoods or the countryside to collect the census data. We can essentially map the route that they took knocking on doors, and that sometimes helps me to understand what part of town a district covered, all with the help of a good map, of course. Now, let's pause here because it's important to understand how this information was collected. See, on Census Day, and here are those dates on the slide for you, each household was to provide the information about who slept in their home that evening. So if someone was living away from home or even just visiting someone or away to work, they won't be listed at home. They'll be listed wherever they were sleeping. The enumerator was then responsible to come around, collect all of that data, to compile it, and to turn it in. All of this points to a rather unfortunate fact, and the fact is this: the census data that you encounter may or may not be completely accurate. I'm sorry if that ruins your day. It's not to be depressing. I'm just simply trying to encourage you to approach all records with a discerning eye and use them as clues to point you to other records which could help you to be more sure, more conclusive about the facts. On census records, for example, we often find that the ages don't quite line up from decade to decade, or Maybe birthplaces disagree. And this is understandable when you consider the fact that we don't even know who the informant was, usually, with the exception of 1911. Did mom provide the information? Was it dad? Was it one of the children that told the enumerator how old everyone was? Maybe it was the farmhand or the neighbor next door. Or if the people were illiterate, they probably just spoke the information, and then it was up to the census taker to interpret what they were saying and interpret their dialects or the spelling of words. So often we find spellings differ from one census to the next, or someone goes by their first name one year and their middle name the next and their nickname the next. So you got to keep an open mind and remember that the image you're looking at, it's a copy. It's a copy, which means errors could have potentially been introduced in the copying process. Again, there is one exception to this. It's that wonderful 1911 census. You've seen this before. Those are actually the original sheets that the household filled out, and you can see in the bottom corner of that census who it was as they signed their name as the informant. Now, to get the most out of your census research, I highly suggest that you always look for your research families in not just one, but all of the censuses that they were alive for. Even though some of the data may seem to be a repeat, this is how stories really start to take shape, when we can view how a family changes over time. So look at my family here. Observe the changes over decades, right? Every 10 years, we look different. So in census searching, we often find extra children we didn't know about when we search multiple censuses for a family. We can trace their moves or their job changes. We may find relatives living with them or extra details. I treat it like a game or a challenge. If I can't find every census for a person I'm researching, I'm kind of antsy about it until I do find what I'm looking for. Look for all of the censuses if you can. I like to keep track of this by creating in my research notes a census checklist or a chart to ensure that I haven't forgotten or lost anybody. And to be truly comprehensive and paint the best picture that you can of this family that you're researching, I also recommend that you should read every column of every census image. Don't just stop at that index, dig into the image, and try to figure out what all of the tally marks and notes mean. The occupations, the addresses, the other tidbits, they're all an important part of the family story. For example, just to drive this point home, that amazing column or columns on the 1911 census about how many children a woman has and how many are still living, these are the little clues that are the key to connecting one family to the same family in subsequent censuses and to make sure we haven't lost anyone. Last year, I presented a 3-part series at Roots Tech just on that topic, making sure that we're not missing someone as we research our English families. So check that video out if you can find it. It's those little clues from obscure census columns that can be very helpful for sorting out people, even people with common names, right? If your John Smith was a shoemaker, well, maybe that helps you to pick him out in the next census. Or at least we can possibly at least eliminate the other John Smiths in town who were not shoemakers, right? We can also use the names of family members or even relatives who are living close by or neighbors to connect people across census years and to make sure that we have the evidence that we need to connect them. And I do recommend that you take some time to get to know a neighborhood. Take a look at the people around your research families. What were the common occupations in the area where they're living? What are the other families doing? Was it a fishing village, a manufacturing town, a railroad hub? So we gather this information by reading through entire census pages or even several pages before and after the people that you're researching. All of this will give you a better visual of the setting of your ancestors' lives. You'll understand their story better. Now, in the beginning, I mentioned that the really good censuses start in 1841 in England and Wales, but let me encourage you to at least consider looking for earlier censuses if they exist in the towns that you're researching in. Now, most of these early censuses were purely statistical, but some parishes actually noted some people's names. In these cases, it's usually just the head of the household, but it's still helpful, right? I can pin my families to these places in these years because these notes were kept. So these earlier censuses, they can be a little harder to come by, but it's worth a try. So these two images you're looking at were accessible in Family Search's catalog in the Doveridge Parish Chest records. You can also try accessing early censuses by contacting the local archives that may have that parish's records. There are a couple of books that I know that have been compiled to point us to these earlier censuses, and there's one online guide, as you see here, which is from the University of Essex. But so far, there hasn't been a great comprehensive index or link to these records online. However, BYU is currently working on a project to index these early censuses, and their project website is ebc.byu.edu. And it's exciting to know that that's happening. So you can go there, see what they've already compiled, and search the index at their site. Well, I hope you have picked up a few ideas today for making census searches more successful. Think of it like a fun treasure hunt, because that's what it is. Uncovering these details about the stories of our ancestors' lives, that's like finding treasure to me. So have fun exploring, and I wish you the very best.